It's part 10 of 100 ideas for your gap year. Today, we're going to be talking about volunteering both close to home and further afield. Probably one of the most popular categories of volunteering, but working with wildlife. Now, the most ethical way to work with wildlife on your gap year is going to be to work with a registered and ethically run rescue charity or rehab and release center. This is an example of an organization in South Africa that rescues and releases African penguins, and you get really stuck in with the work at these centers. So you're preparing food, you're helping clean cages, and if you're lucky, you get to go out on some of these releases where we get to rewild these animals after they're well enough to be back in nature. So, great way to spend part of your gap year. One of the other most popular ways to volunteer on a gap year is teaching English. And you can do this with a TEFL certification, which is a special certification for teaching English as a foreign language, or you can work in a more casual setting where schools and other after school programs or early childhood centers have requested help to help students increase their proficiency in English language. Now, this is such an important skill for many, many young people around the world because when you speak English at proficiency, it allows you to test into higher levels of education or perhaps seek post-secondary education as well. So if you are a native English speaker, that's usually the only qualification. And I would just encourage you to stay as long as possible in your placement so you can make the most impact. If you love working with kids, but you don't want to be in a classroom environment, there's so many great opportunities to coach sports around the world. And sometimes students will do this if they already know a sport or if they've played a sport in high school. But you can also learn and coach on new sports or things like swimming, which again, that can be such an amazing life skill that not everybody gets to learn in other places. So, and again, coaching can be something that you do close to home in your own community. A great organization to work with if you're local is Girls on the Run, where you help young women in third through fifth grade learn life skills while reaching a 5K. Or you can go abroad and work with after school programs or in schools where they have these athletic and physical education programs that really need assistance. So, either way, it's great to get kids active. Again, for my animal lovers, if you don't want to work with wildlife, there's so many ways to work with domestic wildlife. So think animal shelters, places like barns and ranches, and places with other domesticated critters that need, again, another pair of hands. So there are, organizations that work with, for example, rescued horses, or, your animal shelter in your local community where you can volunteer and walk dogs or care for the cats and things like that. And this is a great resume builder, but it's also just such a therapeutic way to be with animals, especially if you are an animal lover. There are community development projects all around the world that you can work with and do a variety of different projects as indicated by the communities themselves. So that's one thing that you really want to look for in an ethical volunteer project, is that the community is at the forefront of telling the volunteers what they need and advocating for what they're hoping are for their community. So in this case, these are volunteers on an experiential education program who are help refurbishing a local school or community center. And there are other projects that are a little bit more in depth or longer term that happen in these communities. It just depends on the program. Those of you who want to get or already have a PADI certification and want to be in the water on your gap year or by the shore, because there's a lot of shore-based opportunities as well, or even boat-based opportunities, but there are so many ways to learn about and engage in marine conservation on your gap year. Here's a great example of a coral restoration project where you're actually diving every day and building out coral in places where the coral has been depleted. Other projects have you digging in with data collection and research, or protecting nesting sea turtles on endangered beaches and things like that. So lots of ways to get involved in this, especially for you STEM kids who are thinking about going into the sciences later in life. Thinking about going into healthcare, public health, or medicine, there are some ways that you can do this in international settings on your gap time that is still ethical. Now, really what you want to be focusing on is what you are qualified to do as a volunteer if you are 18, 19, or 20 years old. So in this case, this is a volunteer project where students are actually shadowing doctors who serve rural locations and deliver medicine in places that don't have consistent healthcare. So that's a great way to understand how under-resourced communities can receive healthcare, and also it really gives a sense of what their healthcare system looks like in other countries. So another way to volunteer in these places is to do public health education work. So that might be working with community members and children in schools and things like that. So think about what your skill set is and how you might want to deliver that in a different setting. If you do have a higher level medical certification, such as an EMT certification, that may qualify you for more direct service work. Speaking of getting into communities, this is a food shelf that gap year students are volunteering for, and another example of a community service type of project that you can do close to home or in other locations. So you can go volunteer in through AmeriCorps or through other types of community-based projects, and work in direct service to communities all around the country and abroad. Another type of more specific type of volunteer work is women's empowerment projects. And so sometimes these are involved in teaching and working within the schools, and other times they're out of schools or working with even older members of the community to help them with microfinance projects or doing specific workshops that are focused on women's empowerment. Now, I think that if you are engaged in women's empowerment work through teaching, that can be amazing as well because the education of women and girls is so crucial to seeking equitable livelihoods all around the world. Lastly, there are some really awesome opportunities to build your own skill set in construction while contributing to building projects. This is actually a building project in Portland, Oregon, but you can also find projects all around the country as well as abroad. And some of these projects are focused on disaster relief and recovery. So if there's a natural disaster here in the States, there are organizations that kind of come in, help communities get relief with the use of volunteers and help start rebuilding. And the same thing internationally. So there are organizations that will train you and give you that construction training so that you know what you're doing and that you have proper oversight. And then there's other opportunities in these projects that are less, that require no skill at all. So if you are going into a natural disaster, post-secondary relief situation, you can do muck and gutting, which is just like tearing out things that have been destroyed. And you are, again, like given the proper training to do those things. So when it comes to construction, you should never be unsupervised doing any kind of work building. You should never be doing building work that takes away jobs from the local community, and you should be making sure that you are properly supervised at all times and given that proper skill set. So with that said, it's a great opportunity to, again, service a community. There you have it, 100 ways to spend your gap year. Hope it was helpful. And please, if I forgot anything that you think is a great way to spend gap time, drop it in the comments. I would love to hear what you are doing on your gap year.